Welcome to another episode of Mike's Money Picks. Today on the podcast, we are starting our series of 2024 fantasy football rankings. We are going to be looking at it from an overall perspective. All of our takes on the individual position groups, quarterback, running back, receiver, and tight end, those are going to start next week. This week is going to be the overall rankings, and we're going to kick it off with this first episode where we do our rankings number 1 through number 20. Now, I do want to be very clear, this is rankings for your season-long PPR fantasy leagues. I do think that a lot of the logic and a lot of the player takes can be used for best ball leagues as well as half PPR leagues. If you're playing half PPR, then the quarterbacks and the running backs are going to have a little more value. If you are playing best ball, then the wide receivers in general are going to have a little bit more value because stacking is such a thing in best ball, and top tier wide receivers tend to have more ceiling games in best ball. So you're definitely looking to get more wide receivers earlier in best ball. If you don't know what I'm talking about, if you're interested in learning more about best ball fantasy football, check out our other videos on the channel. We've had a lot of best ball fantasy football content this summer for the NFL as well as for college football. And if you like these rankings, make sure you subscribe so that we can be with us for the rest of our rankings this week, as well as our individual position player takes next week. We are closing in on 500 subscribers, and we can only do that if people like you who are watching subscribe. And as always, please help me out. It helps me out more than you could ever know when you hit the like button on the video. All right, that's going to do it for the introduction, y'all. We're going to go ahead and dive in and start talking about our number 1 through number 20. This is the first 2 rounds of a standard 10-team draft that we're going to talk about here in this episode. Let's go ahead and dive in with number. All right, so it should come as no surprise that the number 1 player in my rankings in 2024, the player that I would select if I had the number 1 draft pick in fantasy football, is Christian McCaffrey, the running back of the San Francisco 49ers. McCaffrey was utterly dominant from a fantasy perspective in 2023. He was running back 1 overall by 100 points and running back 1 in fantasy points per game by 3 points per game in the 2023 season. That level of dominance is simply unmatched across any other position group. The difference between QB1 and QB2 and wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 2 were nowhere near as significant as Christian McCaffrey outpaced the rest of the running back group. Now, one thing that I do want to kind of talk about is kind of how I formulated all of these rankings, because the way that I look at running backs and wide receivers has kind of changed a little bit over the years. You are going to hear me probably talk more highly about more wide receivers here on these early shows and more kind of highly about the running backs on the later shows as we get deeper into the rankings. And the reason why is because fantasy points at running back are accrued from volume. I've determined just from enough years of playing fantasy football that you can really just give any jabroni running back 25 carries, 5 targets in a game, whether they're on a good offense, bad offense, whatever. And they're going to churn out a fantasy viable performance, maybe get in the end zone, and maybe it's a really good performance, right? Look at Rachaad White last year as evidence of that. He was on the field all the time. He got the ball thrown to him all the time. And all of the advanced metrics like yards after contact, broken tackles, everything that dictates whether or not a running back is good at football, Rachaad White did not show up very well in. However, because the volume was there, because he saw a ton of snaps, which in turn turned into a ton of carries and a ton of targets, he was a very viable fantasy running back. So when I'm looking at running backs, the number 1 determining factor for me is going to be volume. The second determining factor is going to be whether or not they're actually going to be good at football. And fortunately for us, Christian McCaffrey knocks both of those out of the park. The volume is absolutely there. He ranks second among all running backs in snap share, second among all running backs in total carries last year. And when you account for his use in the passing game as well, he was first among all running backs in total touches. He was also first in all running backs in weighted opportunities, which is a mathematical formula that kind of weighs a target more than a carry, because in PPR leagues, you catch the ball, you get a free point, whereas a carry you would need 10 yards to get a point. So when you factor all that into the equation, McCaffrey was number 1 in weighted opportunities. So the volume is there for McCaffrey. And being good at football, if you've ever watched him, is there for Christian McCaffrey. I got the pleasure of watching him for 4 years as a Carolina Panthers fan. Broke my heart when they traded him, but I absolutely love to see him shine. He's kind of like, as a Panthers fan, this is this is a bad metaphor, but it's kind of what it feels like. He kind of feels like the guy that made it out the ghetto. And like, he got off the bad team and now like we're rooting for him to succeed now that he's out of poverty, pretty much. That's, not to say that he was in poverty, but being on the Carolina Panthers is kind of like the NFL version of being in poverty. So I'm very excited to see him succeed. But anyway, back to what I was saying. I had the pleasure of watching him for 4 years. Obviously very good at football. All the advanced metrics agree. He broke more tackles and had more long runs than any other running back last year. So when you put all this in perspective, there's simply no way that you cannot rate him as your number one player in 2024, in my opinion. If you were to sit there and tell me, well, Mike, I just don't think I'm going to draft McCaffrey number one overall. To me, there's a few narratives that might play into that, but not a lot. There's not really a lot of nits you can pick in McCaffrey's resume. The only ones I can think off the top of my head, first of which is the Madden curse. He's on the cover of Madden this year. If you are a believer in the Madden curse, well, then, you would think that he's going to kind of have a little bit of a fall off this year. And secondly, the historical trend is not kind to running backs who lead the league in touches year after year after year. The only guy who pretty much had a successful season after leading the league in touches the year before was Derrick Henry. Christian McCaffrey, not necessarily built like Derrick Henry. So those would be the only two kind of red flags, but I don't even think they're like that significant red flags. When you look at the production last year, the workload that he's given, how good he is at the position, and also the fact that he plays in a very good and productive offense, Christian McCaffrey, number one player for the 2024 season. Now, let's go ahead and talk about some wide receivers. So also a little bit more into how I came up with these rankings. When I draft, I kind of tier them off in my mind. Like if I'm sitting in like the 7th round, I may be sitting there saying, okay, I'm going to take one of these 3 running backs. And if these 3 running backs all get taken, then I'm going to take one of these 4 wide receivers. Well, that's kind of how I tier my rankings, right? So you're going to kind of see a recurring trend in these rankings videos where, guys are kind of grouped together in their tiers. And so this is the first tier of wide receiver. So the first tier of wide receiver is going to be 4 deep. The number 2 overall player for me is CeeDee Lamb of the Dallas Cowboys. Number 3 is Tyreek Hill of the Miami Dolphins. Justin Jefferson comes in at number 4 of the Minnesota Vikings, and Jamar Chase of the Cincinnati Bengals at number 5. Now, CeeDee Lamb is number 2. He was kind of the Christian McCaffrey of the running back position last year. But here's the difference between running back and wide receiver. Wide receivers don't just get handed volume. Like quite literally, running backs get handed volume. They get the ball handed off to them, right? If you're a wide receiver, you have to earn targets. You have to earn catches. You have to get open. The quarterback has to throw the football to you. And then more importantly, that ball has to be accurate and the wide receiver has to catch it. So really, at the end of the day, at wide receiver, the biggest things that I'm looking at are, do they earn targets or do they, obtain a high target share? And then there's ancillary factors to determine whether or not those targets are going to turn into value. First off is where those targets are going. Is it a high average depth of target? Is it a low average depth of target? Second is whether or not they have a good quarterback throwing to them. That can determine a lot of things. And then third is whether or not they play in a good offense, because you're going to get more opportunities in the red zone and opportunities to score touchdowns as a part of a good offense. So CeeDee Lamb kind of checks all the boxes, and his 2023 performance was indicative of that. CeeDee Lamb is my number 2 overall player. He was the wide receiver 1 overall and in fantasy points per game in the 2023 season. He led the NFL in total targets. He was a volume monster playing for a Dallas Cowboys offense that threw the ball a ton, was a very successful offense. I see no reason that offense is going to have a significant decline in production. If anything, they might be more pass happy given that their running back room and offensive line room is slightly worse than last year. And so CeeDee Lamb should certainly have a lot of volume, should certainly be coming from a good quarterback in a good offense, checks off all the boxes. I see no reason that he cannot have a season similar to what he had last year. And my number 3 overall player is going to be Tyreek Hill of the Miami Dolphins. He was right behind Lamb in total production and in points per game last year. He was wide receiver 2 overall and fantasy points per game in both those categories. Tyreek Hill actually led the NFL in target share and in receiving yards last year. He just was not able to find the end zone or accrue as many catches as CeeDee Lamb, which kind of makes sense because when you think about Tyreek Hill, he's a small guy. A lot of his targets are coming deep down the field. So, there's less of a chance of those targets, succeeding. And in a PPR league, 2 catches for 30 yards is worth the exact same as 1 catch for 40 yards. So, I definitely think that, just the nature of PPR scoring tends to boost CD Lamb over Tyreek Hill. But Tyreek Hill kind of checks all the same boxes that CD did. He earns targets. He's in an elite offense. He's going to have plenty of opportunity to score a lot of touchdowns and plays with a quarterback who's generally pretty accurate until the thermostat reads less than 70 degrees. But that's a story for another time. So my number 4 player is going to be Justin Jefferson, wide receiver of the Minnesota Vikings. A lot of people have Jamar Chase of the Cincinnati Bengals ranked ahead of Justin Jefferson. I do not. So if you go back and look at it historically, Jamar Chase has never outscored Justin Jefferson in a season. And it's really easy for people to look at last year and say, oh, Justin Jefferson fell off. He wasn't that good last year. Well, he kind of had 2 games where he did not play the entire game because of injuries, in addition to other games that he missed due to said injuries. And so he would have been wide receiver 1 in fantasy points per game if you only included the games that he started and finished. And yes, I know that's putting a little bit of a caveat on it, but I kind of think that's the lens through that you have to look through it. When you're drafting fantasy players, I try to not project injury as much as I humanly can, because if your first round pick gets injured, you're going to be screwed no matter who it is. So I just see no reason to project Justin Jefferson below Jamar Chase. If the argument is, well, Justin Jefferson has, J.J. McCarthy or Sam Darnold throwing him the ball now, I don't think that really matters for Justin Jefferson. He had successful games last year with Nick Mullins throwing him passes when Kirk Cousins was injured. So I do not think that is going to be a determining factor for Justin Jefferson. And the fact that he literally has never lost over a full season to Jamar Chase from a points per game perspective. Justin Jefferson is my number 4 overall, and Jamar Chase is number 5. Now, Jamar Chase last year was a slight disappointment. He was wide receiver 11 in fantasy points per game, but you got to remember that he played the latter half of the season without Joe Burrow at quarterback, and he is now getting Joe Burrow back at quarterback. This is also an offense that is losing Tyler Boyd and Joe Mixon, so I think that there might be a slightly bigger target share to go around for Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. So I think that Jamar Chase is quite safely the number 5 overall player on my board. Now, switching gears, number 6 and number 7 are going to be running backs. Now, thinking back to what we talked about with the running back position, these are guys who should certainly see a ton of volume, and these are guys who are also quite good at football. Number 6 overall, my second running back is going to be Bijan Robinson of the Atlanta Falcons. So everybody talks about how much of a disappointment Bijan's rookie season was, but it really wasn't when you look at the large sum of numbers. He was running back 9 overall in 2023. And this was dealing with all of the Arthur Smith shenanigans that the Atlanta Falcons had to deal with, where he pretty much just refused to give his best players the football. It's why he eventually got fired. In case you can't realize, I'm not exactly a big fan of Arthur Smith's coaching style. And so Bijan Robinson last year was able to finish as running back 9 overall when he ranked 31st in the league in opportunity share and 19th in carries. So that number opportunity share means how much of the targets and catches of your backfield are you accruing? And so the fact that he ranked 31st in the league in that, basically he was in one of the most 50-50 backfields in the league with the amount of work that Tyler Algier was seeing. Well, Arthur Smith is no longer there. Bijan Robinson is entering year 2 of his NFL career. Keep in mind, this was a generational running back prospect coming out of the draft on the level of Saquon Barkley, Todd Gurley, and the like. There's no need to not feature him in every way possible. And the new offensive coordinator for the Falcons is a Sean McVay coaching tree disciple. Here's why that matters. So the Sean McVay coaching tree, this is getting a little bit inside here from a little bit of a coach's perspective. The Sean McVay system offensively is designed to, when you break the huddle and come to the line of scrimmage, for everything to look exactly the same. So what they want to do is they want to play the same personnel all game long. They like to line up in the same 2, 3, 4 formations all game long with the same personnel in those formations. So that way the defense has no idea what to expect. From there, they use pre-snap motion and everything to get into all their different looks, but they like to have the same personnel on the field. So that way the defense does not is not able to key on, hey, this is likely to be a run, this is likely to be a pass, or they only run this play with this player, they only run this play with that player. You cannot do that with a Sean McVay offense. It makes preparing for them much harder. That's part of the reason why he's so good and why his coaching tree is so good. You look at all the Sean McVay offenses, they tend to play the same personnel all game long, and they tend to have a workhorse running back, which means Bijan Robinson could be heading towards workhorse season. And if he was running back 9 overall last year, while he was very much embroiled in a committee with Tyler Algier, then what is he going to be able to do if that backfield is all his own? I think that this is a just absolute ceiling opportunity for Bijan Robinson. Is why he comes in as my running back 2. Now, Breece Hall is a worthy candidate for running back 2 as well. I have him behind Bijan because I think that his ceiling is slightly lower than Bijan. Last year, Breece Hall saw a ton of volume. He was running back 2 overall in the 2023 season. The Jets offense, though, with their rotating cast of characters at quarterback that was not Aaron Rodgers, it was quite bad. They did not score a lot of points. They did not get a whole lot of red zone opportunities. What they did do was throw to the running back. And so Breece Hall led all running backs last year in targets, receptions, and receiving yards. He saw a quite healthy workload, and it led to him with a quite good fantasy performance. And so I think that you're going to see this year still a lot of opportunities for Breece Hall in the run game. There probably won't be as many in the pass game because Aaron Rodgers does not check the ball down to running backs as much as their quarterbacks last year did. But the overall success of the offense is going to allow Breece Hall to see more red zone opportunities, more goal line opportunities, and allow him to score more touchdowns, which is what he was really missing last year that prevented it from hitting his ceiling. So I think that it's kind of like a little bit of checks and balances with Breece. We're going to project him for less passing game work, but more touchdowns, more red zone work. Last year, he only had 1 carry inside the 5-yard line all year long. I do not think that's going to be the case this year. Breece Hall very safely my RB3 behind Christian McCaffrey and Bijan Robinson, sitting there at number 7 overall. Now, to close out my top 10, this will be the first round of a 10 teams, PPR fantasy draft. Number 8 is going to be Amon-Ra St. Brown. So Amon-Ra St. Brown last year had a breakout season for the Detroit Lions. He was wide receiver 3 overall and wide receiver 4 in fantasy points per game last year. He was 5th in the league in total targets and target share last year. This is a guy that plays for an offense that throws the ball a ton, and when they throw the ball, they are looking to throw to him. The fact that he was 5th in targets and target share shows that he earns a lot of targets, and that offense is going to pass the ball enough to give him a lot of overall targets. Now, those targets aren't necessarily the most valuable because he has a very low average depth of target, ranks outside the top 70 in the league, but that means they're more secure. They're more likely that he's actually going to catch the football. That makes him an absolute machine in PPR scoring. If you want to bump him down in half PPR, I understand it, but to me, he is absolutely right there at number 8 behind the 2 elite running backs as the 5th receiver off the board, in my opinion. Number 9 is going to be Garrett Wilson, wide receiver, the New York Jets. He is my 6th receiver off the board. He's kind of continuing the trend that started with Breece Hall of this Jets offense was awful last year. They simply have to be better this year. Garrett Wilson was wide receiver 26 overall in 2023, but his volume numbers were there. He was 4th in the league in total targets, 7th in the league in target share, showing that he has the ability to earn targets at a serious rate that's one of the best in the league. But the problem is that those targets did not matter much last year because of how bad the quarterback play was. There were a lot of inaccurate targets. There were just not a lot of end zone and red zone targets. So when those targets become more lucrative this year and he still has the same ability to earn those targets, Garrett Wilson, I think, has the chance for a ceiling season. He is my number 6 wide receiver. My number 7 wide receiver is A.J. Brown of the Philadelphia Eagles. He was wide receiver 5 overall in 2023, 6th in the league in target share. So even though he plays in an offense with a pretty good wide receiver 2 in Devontae Smith, pretty good tight end in Dallas Goedert, he still is able to earn targets at an elite rate. Being 6th in target share with 2 other very viable targets in your offense is quite impressive in my opinion. And I think that this Eagles offense this year, with Kellen Moore coming over as the offensive coordinator, he's going to run at a faster tempo. He's going to use more pre-snap motion than what Philly did last year. And so I think that the Philly offense actually has quite a high ceiling this year. And so, if you do want to nitpick A.J. Brown and say, hey, he's in an offense with a mobile quarterback. He's got other guys to fight for targets. Yeah, but there's going to be more targets to go around because they're running at a faster tempo, and those targets should be better because they're coming as a part of a better offense this year. So A.J. Brown still very safely my wide receiver 7, number 10 overall. All right, so we're going to take a quick breather, and then we're going to get – all right, so the first half of my teens, I guess you could call it picks, are going to be all running backs, 5 straight running backs. And then the next 5 are actually going to be 5 straight wide receivers. Again, when I draft, I like to think of, hey, I'm about to pick one of these 3 running backs, or if those get taken, I'm going to take one of these 3 wide receivers. And so that kind of bears itself out in these rankings. So these just so happen to be 5 deep because I find these tiers to be quite even. So for the running back position, the next running back off the board, my 4th running back for the 2024 season, my number 11 overall ranked player for the 2024 season is Saquon Barkley of the Philadelphia Eagles. Look, Saquon Barkley was running back 9 last year in fantasy points per game as a member of the New York Giants. That offensive line in New York last year was so bad. The offense in general with Daniel Jones getting hurt earlier in the season was just not good. And so Saquon Barkley saw a ton of volume as a part of a bad offense, and now he's going over to Philly, which is going to be a much better offensive line, much better offense. This is the best offensive line Saquon has ever had in his NFL career. I think that Saquon has an incredible ceiling as a member of the running back of this offense. He's always been a guy that saw a ton of passing volume in New York. That hasn't necessarily been Philly's MO the last few years, but bringing over Kellen Moore as an offensive coordinator, the Kellen Moore offense loves to throw to the running back. So I do think that this is a pretty good opportunity for Saquon to see a similar amount of opportunity that he saw last year in New York in terms of being the workhorse back, being a true 3 down back, being a receiving back, as well as just getting carries, but also now being a part of a better offense with a better offensive line blocking for him. I think this is a great opportunity for Saquon. He is my 4th running back, number 11 overall. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. Well, Mike, if I had the 10th pick in a 10-person draft, I'm not going to take A.J. Brown and then Saquon Barkley, and I would agree with that. I do not think that is a good strategy. But I think it would be very wise to lead the draft with one of them. So, if you're sitting there at 10 and, you want to get A.J. Brown at 10, I wouldn't take Saquon at 11. I'd take my next guy. Or maybe A.J. Brown gets taken before you end up getting something like Garrett Wilson and then Saquon Barkley. I think that's a very good strategy as well. But I do think that Saquon is the start of this tier of running back, in my opinion. That is why he ends up being number 11. That does not mean I would take A.J. Brown and Saquon Barkley with back-to-back picks in the same draft. Be smart. So, number 12 is going to be Jonathan Taylor of the Indianapolis Colts. He was running back 12 in fantasy points per game in a very weird 2023 season that started with his contract holdout. And look, this is the only guy here, actually Saquon can say this as well, that has had a running back 1 season that is not named Christian McCaffrey. And you can still draft in the prime of his career. So like Derrick Henry, sorry, you're a little bit past your prime, buddy. So I really think that this is a good opportunity for Jonathan Taylor this year, coming into his prime, not having a holdout. Anthony Richardson is going to be the quarterback. Some people might be worried about Richardson stealing carries for Jonathan Taylor, but I think that Richardson being the quarterback means that there's going to be more carries to go around because they're not going to have him throw the ball 50 times a game. So I think that this is a good opportunity for Jonathan Taylor. He is my 5th running back coming off the board, number 12 overall. Kyren Williams is my RB6. He was great last year, running back 7 overall, running back 2 in fantasy points per game as a member of the Los Angeles Rams. Look, I think that Kyren last year is a product of the volume that he saw after Cam Akers fell out of favor in that offense. And if he sees that volume again, he's going to be that good again. I think he's a legitimately good NFL player. The advanced metrics like him in terms of broken tackles and yards after contact and all that. He's a good NFL player. He was good at Notre Dame. I don't think last year was a fluke. The only concern on Kyren is if he's able to keep that role, because think about how quickly Cam Akers fell out of favor in the Sean McVay offense. Who's to say that cannot happen to Kyren? But as long as he is the workhorse running back, Kyren Williams is an easy pick at number 13, in my opinion. Jahmyr Gibbs is going to be my number 14 player. So the trouble with Jahmyr Gibbs is that he is kind of like where I would have Breece Hall and Bijan Robinson if they did not have the same projectable volume, because the problem with Jahmyr Gibbs is that David Montgomery is still in Detroit. Now, the good news is that last year, Jahmyr Gibbs, even with Montgomery in Detroit, was still able to finish as running back 10 overall, running back 8 in fantasy points per game in 2023. Now, if you're sitting there thinking, wait a minute, he was better fantasy points per game than overall, how does that work? Well, it means he missed a few games, and also, to be frank, they're not rushing Jahmyr Gibbs back from injury as long as they have David Montgomery. So he's a guy that he might miss a few more games than some other guys who might grade it out, because simply the team doesn't need him as much at his position as some other guys. So I do think that Gibbs is a very good player, very productive player, elite usage in the passing game, but the presence of David Montgomery limits me from putting him over the other guys. I think that it's a little bit tougher pill to swallow with Gibbs just because he does not have the same projectable volume that every other guy above him does, and quite frankly, a few guys below him even do, but they're not quite the same explosive player that's going to see the same usage in the passing game that he does. I'm kind of like number 15, Isaiah Pacheco of the Kansas City Chiefs. So some people might be thinking, whoa, Isaiah Pacheco, what's he doing up here? He was only running back 15 overall and running back 14 in fantasy points per game last year. How can you have him possibly at your running back? Hold on, let me do some counting here. Running back 8 overall. I had to make sure that I was on 8, not 9. So Pacheco is my running back 8 overall because the 3-down role in Kansas City now belongs to him. This team did not bring back Jerick McKinnon. They still do not seem to have any affinity for playing Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Deneric Pierce is the only other competition for targets and carries out of this backfield. So as it stands right now, Isaiah Pacheco is the 3-down back in Kansas City. And let me tell you, the 3-down back in that Kansas City offense is quite lucrative. If you were to add together Jerick McKinnon's points last year and Isaiah Pacheco's points last year in games that they both started or in games that they were both active, it would pretty much equal Christian McCaffrey. Now, that would require a lot from Pacheco. That would require him to play pretty much every single snap, but I still think that if he plays a much higher snap share, sees a lot more targets in the passing game now that McKinnon is gone, that will allow him to hit his ceiling. Running back 8 is where I have him. Number 15 overall is where I have Isaiah Pacheco for the 2024 season. Now, 16 through 20, the home stretch of the episode. Number 16 is going to be Puka Nacua of the Los Angeles Rams. He is my wide receiver 8 overall, number 16 overall. Look, Puka was great last year. He was wide receiver 4 overall, wide receiver 6 in fantasy points per game. My slight concern is that he kind of needed Cooper Kupp to miss a lot of games to get that outcome. So I don't necessarily think he's going to have the same ceiling as long as Cooper Kupp is active and playing games. But you flash as much as he did as a rookie, and that's like not – that's hard to ignore. It's hard to doubt. It's hard to pick, poke holes in. And so Puka Nacua, sitting strongly at wide receiver 8, in my opinion. I really think that all it would take is a Cooper Kupp injury, and he'd be back to being like a top 5 wide receiver like he was last year. Number 17 is going to be Marvin Harrison of the Arizona Cardinals. Look, this is, quite frankly, the best wide receiver prospect to come into the league since A.J. Green and Julio Jones. I watch a lot of college football. I watch a lot of NFL draft coverage. I've seen a lot of wide receivers come into this league. He is like the truth when it comes to being a wide receiver prospect. And he went to a good offense in Arizona with Kyler Murray, who, when Kyler Murray had DeAndre Hopkins as his wide receiver 1, just absolutely fed him the football. And I think that's going to be the case again this year for Marvin Harrison. And if you're sitting there thinking, well, Mike, rookies don't have that high of ceiling. Puka Nacua was wide receiver 4 last year. A.J. Green, Julio Jones, Justin Jefferson, and Jamar Chase, all top 15 wide receivers as rookies. So Marvin Harrison, sitting in my wide receiver 9, absolutely has the ability to do so, considering he was a better prospect, or as good a prospect as everybody I just named. Number 18, my wide receiver 10, is going to be Deebo Samuel of the San Francisco 49ers. He was wide receiver 15 overall, wide receiver 13 in fantasy points per game in 2023. But what I like about Deebo is, to me, all these 49ers players, McCaffrey, Deebo, Ayuk, Kittle, they all have contingent upside. What I mean by that is Deebo really shines in games that Ayuk misses, and Kittle really shines in games that Deebo misses, and Deebo really shines in games that McCaffrey misses. And all it takes is one piece of that puzzle to be gone, and all the other guys are going to have ceiling outcomes. And so if Christian McCaffrey misses games, Deebo Samuel could end up being a top 5, top 3 fantasy wide receiver. In 2021, when he was being used as a running back, he was the wide receiver 3 in fantasy. So we know that ceiling is there for Deebo, and we know that ability is there. All it would take is for just an injury to break the right way, and he would be, in that upper echelon with CeeDee Lamb and Tyreek Hill. But as it stands right now, as the 49ers have everybody, even if Brandon Ayuk does start the season as a 49er, I still have Deebo Samuel as my 18th ranked player. 19 is going to be Chris Olave of the New Orleans Saints. He was wide receiver 16 overall in 2023. And look, to me, this is a lot of projection on, I think that the Saints offense is going to be better this year. They have a new offensive coordinator coming in who's going to kind of modernize their offense. Chris Olave is a guy who sees a lot of deep targets. His air yards numbers through his first 2 years in the league have been absolutely incredible. And if he's able to realize all of those air yards with a better offensive system, with Derek Carr, kind of at the tail end of his career throwing to him, I think that Chris Olave does have potential to be an elite fantasy wide receiver. It's why he comes in as the number 19 player on my board. And then number 20 is going to be Mike Evans of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This is not a sexy pick. This is not a trendy pick. This is not a pick that everybody in your draft is going to go like, oh, wow, great pick. But Mike Evans is just the epitome of consistency from a fantasy wide receiver perspective. 1,000 yards in every season of his career. Last year with Baker Mayfield throwing him the football, he was wide receiver 7 overall. I don't necessarily expect that same outcome again. I think he would need to kind of get lucky with some other guys having injuries and, kind of lucky on the number of touchdowns he scores to hit that outcome. But I do think that, it just as consistent as he is, his ability to earn targets throughout his entire NFL career, he is my wide receiver 12 on this season. And Mike Evans is a guy that, he's not going to be somebody that impresses everybody in your league when you take him, but he's one of those guys that can absolutely build towards a winning fantasy football roster. And so those are my top 20 players for the 2024 fantasy football season. If this video helped you out in any way, please hit the like button. It helps me out a ton, helps me out more than you could ever know, and I really do appreciate it. And if you would like access to my full fantasy football rankings, then you can get them on the Patreon, patreon.com/Mike'sMoneyPicks. And also, once the NFL season starts, you are going to be able to have those or have the weekly DFS articles for the NFL as well as college football. We also have our college football best ball rankings as well as some other NFL best ball tools that are available on the Patreon as well. So if you want the full rankings, if you want the best ball tools, head on over to Patreon, patreon.com/Mike'sMoneyPicks. Now, if you noticed on today's episode, we didn't mention any quarterbacks, didn't mention any tight ends. You want more on those guys. Stay tuned for our next episode. We're going to be doing players 20 through 50 on one episode. So make sure you are subscribed to the YouTube channel as well as to the audio. But other than that, hopefully this episode was able to give you guys some great information, help get you guys ready for your fantasy drafts that are coming up. Thank you guys for watching the list to this point, and I will see you guys next time.